More than 1,000 migrants have crossed the Channel to the UK in just one day.
A new record for the current migrant crisis.
Illegal migration is a very, very important problem and issue for our country.
Priti Patel has got some real problems on her hands.
This week, the British and French governments pledged to work together to stop 100% of illegal Channel crossings. Sounds strong, sounds united, but we've heard it all before from these politicians, and the exact opposite's been happening. As you saw at the top of the programme, a record number of people are crossing from France to the UK illegally, which can only mean that the UK and French governments are either incompetent or are misleading everyone when they say they're going to crack down on the people smugglers. We'll discuss that in a moment, but first a quick look at how the media's been covering the story in this record-breaking year.
We have spotted another small rib which appears to be a migrant boat.
1,000 people reached the UK in a single day yesterday, and a new record for the current migrant crisis.
More people are attempting to cross the English Channel by boat than ever before.
The fourth boat of migrants that we have seen so far today.
The migrants are attempting the journey every day if the weather is good.
Dozens of people carrying a boat down a beach in northern France, determined to set off for Britain.
And the French police have watched all of this happen and haven't lifted a finger to intervene.
Most are rescued at sea by the emergency services or by the border force.
Have you come from Calais? Have you come from Calais?
Can you tell me why you're here? Was France not a nice country to live in? Young men wearing Nike trainers, carrying smartphones. I'm sorry, but that's not a refugee.
We need to treat these people with compassion and justice.
England very good. England respect anyone. England very beautiful.
If you enter illegally from a safe country like France, where you should and could have claimed asylum, you are not seeking refuge from persecution.
I mean, they're not in danger where they are. If they want to come over here, why not go through the legal channels?
We have to try and do our best for them. But I just get the impression that France are maybe not doing as much as they could from their end.
Why do people go to Calais to go to Great Britain? And why do they go to Britain? Because the British labour market functions in many ways with an army of reserves of irregular workers who can work there.
We need to close down that movement from the French beaches to the UK if you want to stop people coming into France to come to the UK.
Relations are very strained.
Well, the British and French know the situation's out of control, and so this week, Britain's Home Secretary Priti Patel and her French counterpart Gérald Darmanin had a little tête-à-tête and then released a joint statement saying they'd agreed to strengthen operational cooperation further. More must be done, they said, to stop the dangerous crossings. They agreed to accelerate the delivery of the commitments made in July this year to deliver on their joint determination to prevent 100% of crossings. 100%. It's hard to take them seriously when you consider that since that agreement in July, the numbers have only been going up. The day before that agreement was signed, a record 430 people crossed the Channel illegally. On Thursday last week, 1,185 people crossed into the UK illegally, setting a new daily record and dwarfing the previous high of 853 set on November the 3rd. Now, the Anglo-French deal in July, which cost the British taxpayer a great deal of money, was supposed to stop all that. Patel agreed to pay the French $74 million, and in exchange, Darmanin pledged France would double the number of police patrolling French beaches and use so-called wide-area surveillance technology to stop the crossings. It's clearly not been working, and one of the reasons is that the migrants and the people smugglers they pay to get across have been changing their routes. The French tend to focus on Calais and Dunkirk, but this whole area in red is now being used by people smugglers from the River Somme right up to the border with Belgium, and it's difficult to keep an eye on every bit of the coastline. The French authorities say they're too stretched to stop everyone, and even when they do manage to catch the migrants and smugglers on the beaches, they often find themselves vastly outnumbered by migrants, the majority of whom are young men. Now, there are quite a few British politicians and others who say the French are just making excuses and don't actually want to stop the boats.
The French are not doing their part. Yesterday, we had a French military naval vessel escorting one of the boats into British territorial waters.
France are intercepting more white boats than they did this time last year. So I think, we have to reflect upon that. And that is because the numbers are so high. The numbers are going up.
Two crimes are being committed by the occupants of those boats. One is trying to enter the UK illegally, and secondly is paying money to organised crime, both of which provide grounds for those boats to be intercepted, the occupants apprehended in as safe a way as possible, and returned to France. You are getting fobbed off with excuses.
Of course, Priti Patel denies being fobbed off by the French, and she insists she's very tough on protecting the UK's borders. But the numbers before and after she was appointed Home Secretary in July 2019 do not support her claims. In the year before she took the job, fewer than 300 people crossed the Channel illegally. In 2019, the number was around 1,900. Last year, 8,417. And this year, over 23,500. The pressure is building on her to do something.
What is happening in the Channel with small boats is unsafe, unfair, and unacceptable.
Now, this is a big story with many different aspects to it, including rights, responsibilities, morals, and ethics. But today we're focusing on trying to answer one question. Why is it that the UK and France, two of the richest and most powerful nations in the world, are not able to achieve their stated aims of stopping small boats from crossing the Channel illegally? And that is today's debate. So let's bring in our guests. And up there we have Tony Smith, the retired Director General of the UK Border Force. He's now a global border security consultant. We're also joined by political commentator Andre Walker. And for the French perspective, we have the French journalist Anne-Elisabeth Moutet. Welcome to all three of you. Andre Walker, I'll put that question to you. Two very powerful countries, big militaries, rich economies. Why can't they achieve their stated aims?
I think because there is a lack of will on most people within both the British and the French government. What we see time and time again is that we pass legislation, whether that be in Britain, whether that be in France, or indeed anywhere else in the world, and that legislation is comprehensively ignored. If you look at what has happened today with the situation in Liverpool, a terrorist bomber who should have been deported simply wasn't deported because the system just absolutely doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because people constantly attempt to derail it. What we've seen, I think, in the English Channel, which is one of the most dangerous waters in the world, because it's narrow, people forget that. But what we've seen is the French Navy escorting these small dinghies over to the British Navy, Royal Navy, who then escort them to Dover. None of these people who step off the boats are ever deported anywhere at all. And the reason people come across in such numbers is because they know that that system works. Now, what we need to do is bring together the law with the reality of the situation. We need to force both the British and French governments to actually enforce the laws as they exist. And what the laws say is that you should not be crossing into this country if you wish to claim asylum, because you need to claim it in the first safe country. The original intention, by the way, of that UN rule was that what people would do was cross the border into the country next door, stay there for a period of time, and then go back. At the end of the day, when you've got tens of thousands of resourceful people and no effort on the part of the British and French government, they will make it across.
Andre, you did mention the law, as you understand it, that you have to claim asylum in the first safe country that you enter. That has been disputed. We will get to that later in the programme. But you're basically saying the British and French governments cannot be trusted to keep their word. Is that what you're saying, in a word, in a nutshell?
Absolutely right.
OK, let's take it over to Paris. Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, do you think that the governments are incompetent or they're lying about their stated aims?
I don't think the governments are lying about their stated aims, and therefore I would rather sort of think that they are incompetent. But you also have to take into account the law of the sea, and the law of the sea is entirely different. You do not let people, whoever they are, drown in the sea. I sail myself. I feel strongly about this. And therefore, when you've got those skiffs which have been cynically, in which those poor people have been cynically put for great amounts of money, once you are at sea, whichever navy gets to them first, they can't wait until they reach British territorial waters or some place that would be more convenient politically. They have to rescue them immediately because the sea is
Anne
dangerous.
Elizabeth, if I may interrupt you for a moment, we are going to get to maritime law and the UN refugee law in a moment, but before they ever depart, they are on French beaches. Why has the French government not put sufficient numbers of police and aerial surveillance in place to stop them ever leaving France? Is it because there's a lack of political will? Is it the case that Paris doesn't actually care if they leave? Perhaps it's even a release valve, if you like, to let some out of the system.
Well, it's not exactly a release valve, because the more get into Britain that way, the more hear about this, and the more go into the system with the people traffickers and the small skiffs and the difficult crossing and the staying month in the entire coastal region. What has happened of late is that everything was sort of concentrated on the area around Calais. The mayor of Calais and the authorities of Calais and the inhabitants of Calais, quite understandably, were extremely tired of having a situation in which you had people roaming about the place, difficult to house, parking themselves about all over the place. There was an element of danger for people living in Calais. And in general, what they've done is whenever there seemed to be a camp that was being created, was the thing that people knew, the jungle, or that thing that used to be called Sangatte, the side effects were terrible. So they would destroy them, and they were also hoping, it may not be an elegant or humane way of doing it, but that the word back to wherever these people were coming from initially would be, France is not such a good place to go. What happened, however, in sort of relieving the city of Calais was that the departures now are from great tracts of the coastline. It's a long coastline. There has been an agreement between Priti Patel and Gérald Darmanin, the French Home Secretaries, and Britain has said, fine, we will help you to the tune of something which is somewhere around 61 million pounds, I think, to pay for more patrols, more extra hours, more more material to try and police that part. All of this being the fact that the British border happens to be on French soil, thanks to the Le Touquet Treaty. But the French are now saying that they still have not been paid.
Look, one of my big concerns about all this, and by the way, the people of Calais, the mayor of Calais, a lot of these people work in the ports and they fully understand what's going on, so I don't necessarily blame them. But look, let's just get down to the basics, because there's always this level of hand-wringing. When these people are in French territorial waters and the French Navy come across them, why not take them back to France? Similarly, I'm not being funny, but whoever it is who is selling all of these dinghies, because remember, when these ribs go into the channel, they're then discarded. Who is it who's selling, I don't know, 20 of these a week when there is no commercial need for 20 a week? Let's arrest that guy. And similarly, in terms of patrols on the beaches, I genuinely believe that the money that has been spent, if the French need more money, then demand more money. But in reality, what we saw on Sky News in the UK was an example in broad daylight of people carrying out these ribs and going into the channel. And let me just make this point, because I think it's extremely important. We do not know how many people were killed crossing the Mediterranean when the migrant crisis was focused on the Mediterranean. We know the number of people who got here, but we have no way of knowing how many were killed. Let me tell you, the Mediterranean in many respects is a walk in the park compared to the English Channel, which is the busiest shipping lane on earth and also one of the most choppy. We've got to remember something. All these do-gooders who obsess about trying to bring more people to the UK, they've got blood on their hands as far as I'm concerned.
Let's move this over to Tony Smith now. Tony, you were the Director General of the UK Border Force. You know all about this. You spent years on this subject. Are the record numbers we're seeing as a result of a lack of political will, or is it operationally too difficult, or both?
It's a lack of political will. There is provision in the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea for neighbouring countries to work together on search and rescue. In fact, that is encouraged. But the situation we find ourselves in at the moment is that the French position is they will deploy resources onto the beaches to stop people getting onto the sea. But once they are on the sea, the French simply refuse to intervene. And their reason for so doing is because they believe that the migrants don't want to be rescued by the French maritime agencies because they want to get to the UK. What's then happening is that what you're doing is fueling a human smuggling supply chain where people are getting into UK territorial waters. The UK asylum system is broken. The Home Secretary has admitted that. She's trying to fix that with new legislation, which is in the Houses of Parliament right now to fix that. But there is absolutely no reason why the two countries could not sit down and agree a treaty which said that anybody coming across in this way would be picked up either by the British or by the French, or we could even have joint vessels. We could have our officers on their vessels and vice versa. It's all allowable, and they would be returned instantly to Calais, where the French have a very fair asylum system. Nobody is fleeing persecution from France, but we have a political impasse. The French will not go that far, and I believe there are political considerations at play there in terms of all kinds of reasons why that may be, because the UK is no longer part of the European Union. We're no longer in the Dublin Convention. There are other issues at play, fishing rights, a whole host of political reasons, which mean that the French, and I think for their own indigenous population, find it quite difficult to argue to their electorate, well, look, we're going to stop migrants going across to the UK, when actually the French have lost control of their own borders.
Tony, I want to return. Tony, I want to return to the point about maritime law in a moment, but you did insinuate, at least, that the French are using this issue because it's part of a broader battle between Britain and France, which includes Brexit and fishing rights. Just a quick rebuttal, Anne Elizabeth, if you could.
I think there is such a thing as a sort of French bloody-mindedness about post-Brexit, about customs and about other things. I don't think it applies so much to the refugees. It's something that's really a different area, and I might add different ministers, different parts of the government. And it's not the sort of thing with which they want to essentially play sort of strongman of Europe over.
Now, Tony, we were talking about maritime law. I've read in many places in the UK media that once one of these small boats is in the water, under maritime law, the French cannot intercept them. You say that's rubbish?
Yes, that's rubbish. The reason it's rubbish is because the French maritime agencies, the same way as any other international maritime aid, has a duty, an international duty under the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea to rescue people who are in danger. And everybody that's coming across in these boats, if you've seen the pictures, are in danger. These boats have no navigational equipment. They have no licenses. They're being driven by human smugglers, and people are drowning. Both sides have a duty under international law to rescue people. But the French position is that they will not do that because their interpretation, and I stress their interpretation of international law, is that they don't need to do that. But it's a bit surprising that the French can very easily seize two British fishing vessels and find them very, very quickly and detain them. And yet when we see these vast numbers now, over 1,000 again today, coming across in small vessels, they find it impossible to be able to predict them. And I think that is purely a political position.
One of the things that I find enormously frustrating about this is the dishonesty on our part as the British. Right, so what effectively happens is we know that these boats have come from France, and we know that people have destroyed their documents. The reason they've destroyed their documents, as anyone knows, I'm sure Tony will agree, it's incredibly difficult to deport somebody when you haven't got a country to deport them to because you haven't got any documents. But my problem is this: we know these boats have come from France. The idea that when they get to Dover, we don't actually know where they've come from, therefore we can't do anything about it, is nonsense. Just because you don't have the paperwork doesn't mean you don't know the facts of the situation.
What if the intervention by the French Navy causes them to capsize, and instead of rescuing them, they actually harm them?
Well, from my point of view, I mean, look, I think that the greatest thing that we can do is discourage people from attempting the journey in the first place. You know, I was on a ferry from Dover to Calais once when the wind got up, and believe me, in a full ferry manned with professional sailors that does it twice, 3 times a day, it was extremely dangerous. The number one thing we can do is tow these people back to France, get them off the boats, and make sure the whole thing fails. Allowing them to come to the United Kingdom and then saying, we don't know where they've come from because they've got no papers, is not the solution to the problem.
Tony,
and I think if I could just say, I mean, I think the point, there's a point here that you have to break the supply chain. You see, there is a supply chain here of human smuggling. They are saying to migrants, "Give me €5,000 and get in this boat." They don't care about human life. They just want the money. More and more of them are doing it because the business model is succeeding. They're getting across. They're getting into the UK, and as you say, there are good reasons why we can't deport them to their home countries. There are no good reasons why we can't send them immediately back to France. If we were to do that, and you would be able to broadcast that in media to see that was happening, that would break the business model in an instant. But
because the problem is...
Sorry, I do need to come in. We're running out of time. Tony, there have been... Priti Patel, Britain's Home Secretary, made headlines a couple of months ago when she said that she would tell the border force to start to learn and deploy pushback tactics if necessary. And it would be, the reports are, it would be up to individual border force captains to do that, to turn a boat around and send them back into French waters. Do you support that? Are there any dangers to that tactic?
Yes, that's hugely dangerous. People will drown. Because these are very unseaworthy vessels, and they will resort to tactics. They will drop babies into the ocean. There will be all kinds of horror stories if we try to do that. And so the criteria is really strictly drawn about pushbacks. And none of the boats that I've seen actually meet the criteria on the working engine navigation and the rest of it. But what if we work together with our French colleagues? If we had joint patrols, they're exclusively to save lives. To pick up migrants in small boats because they shouldn't be there. They've got no licenses to be operating on those waters. Save them, get them on board, save the babies, save the women, save everybody jointly. SOS, right? Law of the sea, save our souls, get them on board. But then once they're safe and well, you return them instantly. When they came, they'd stop coming. It's as simple as that. But we cannot get our political leaders to broker that agreement.
Andre mentioned earlier in the programme, right at the beginning, that if a refugee, a migrant, an asylum seeker, they must claim sanctuary in the first safe country they enter. That has been challenged in the law, and it is still up for dispute.
So we've brought in a new law. We're bringing one in, if it gets through Parliament.
The Nationality and Borders Bill?
Yes, which reinterprets Article 31 of the UN Convention of Refugees, which says that people should be allowed, should not be penalised if they are immediately fleeing persecution from a country where they, where their lives are at risk, or they're worried about government intervention, political asylum. They are not immediately fleeing persecution. Now, what's happened is there's been a series of judgments in the European courts over a great many years, which effectively have led to an operational situation. But all you need to do is mention the magic word asylum wherever you get found by anybody, and you're into the country for an indeterminate period. Now we're not bound by the European court judgments anymore. We're saying, well, we don't believe that that's the meaning of Article 31. You've come from France. It's a safe third country. You can seek asylum there. There is absolutely no reason why you should be given asylum here, and you should not be returned to France. But the catch, of course, is we do need the French to agree to take them back. We can't have ping pong going on across the English Channel.
Tony, can I ask you, obviously the crossings across the Channel are very visible. What percentage of overall crossings, illegal crossings, are they? Because obviously you also have in ferries and in lorries being reported, crossings in those two sorts of vehicles.
Yeah, well, in many respects, we're victims of our own success in the UK border force because, we've worked very closely with the French to secure the port of Calais. We've put more investment in there for more police officers. We've got good search capabilities. But so the migrant smugglers are resorting to this method because they can't get them into the ports and more. They can't get them into the backs of lorries. So but I said before, they don't care about human life. So they now resorted to even more dangerous methods, which is this maritime route, which was not an issue in my time in the border force.
Elizabeth, your Interior Minister said that France shouldn't be used by Britain as a punch bag, and in fact it is the black market for labour in the United Kingdom that attracts so many people, and that is something the British need to address. Did you agree with that?
Yes, we have several grievances, and when I say we, I say my country. It's not personal.
Okay.
The fact that it's very easy to disappear within British society because you don't have national ID or papers for people in the country. You don't know who's illegal and let you do cumbersome tests. And the other one, of course, is that there is more than a legend that the migrants, even illegal ones, get good benefits and a number of advantages when they get to Britain, which are very humane, but essentially act as a magnet for them, and then they just cross France. They don't stay in France, which is a democratic country and where they're not in danger, and they absolutely want to go to Britain.
And Elizabeth Moutet, Andre Walker, Tony Smith, thank you all very much for your contributions to the Nexus today. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. If you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Till next week then, goodbye.